Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is I, Bob Plankers, back with another episode of, hey, we've got a new version of stuff. Let's see what's in it. And VCR 9, VCF 9, a lot of really interesting stuff. And so I talk about security and compliance. There's a ton of things that are new and a little different, improved in VCF 9. And I'm not going to cover absolutely all of it. I'm going to pick out the things us security minded people might find interesting. And recall, I come from an IT operations background too, so that kind of informs this. But yeah, let's get into it here a little bit. I always like to start with sort of our strategy, and things have changed a little bit. Our strategy continues to be the same, but we really want to put it into words. We really want you to be secure faster. We want to take a lot of the work away from your IT teams and all that stuff, and what we can automate, do that to keep it flexible, because no environment is the same, no security requirements are the same, heck, no regulatory compliance standards are the same out there. And so yeah, whatever we can do to keep it flexible and but turn things on by default, that's really important. Another big thing about VCF, and it's a real differentiator for us, is that we're building inherent trust. Inherent trust in these deployments. And it's, a deployment of VCF doesn't require you to necessarily have blind trust in a third-party provider, kind of like public clouds do. Not to be too on the nose here, but a lot of hosted things, a lot of cloud providers basically ask that you trust everything below your guest operating system. And how does that work? There's a lot of organizations that are increasingly uncomfortable with that. And one of the things in VCF, we can replace trust. We talk about zero trust in environments, and zero trust means less trust, not more trust. A lot of organizations call it zero trust, but then it expands, and that's not the right direction. We want less trust. And we want to replace that trust with continuous verification. Why trust when you have data to say that you are trustworthy? And so, yeah, you get what I'm saying. And so really trying to drive that home as well. VCF operations does a lot in that regard. The continuous verification of security controls. We're starting to see that in VCF operations, the security dashboards that are there, the compliance dashboards. But like I said earlier here, keep it flexible so that when an environment differs from our opinion of things, and all of them do, we publish guidelines for things, but they're not requirements, they're guidelines. Hey, Bob, what would you do if you were implementing this? Well, this is what I would do. But that doesn't mean it's right for you and your organization. So context is really important in security. And then last, resilience. Resilience has been the primary feature of VMware products since vMotion was introduced 20 years ago. And with that and the gray in my beard, I'm starting to feel really old, but it's all right. All this stuff is cyclical, and we're coming around to realizing that we don't talk about resilience. We sort of moved on, but with like the EU's DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA, most all of DORA aligns with VCF capabilities almost directly. It's nice. So it doesn't matter if you've got an unplanned outage, you've got a tactical thing, you just want to de-risk an application upgrade, or you're worried about ransomware, or just want to move stuff out of the way of a hurricane or something. We can do that. You can build environments to do that while keeping all of these other things, inherent trust. So let's get into it. I'm sort of a bad news first kind of guy. And so let's talk about removals and changes, things that might have an impact on your environment. So few things. This is definitely not, you should really read the release notes, definitely not the entirety of deprecations and removals. And as a reminder, a deprecation means that it's still in the product, it's still fully supported in the product, but the next version, and we'll talk about versioning in just a minute or two here, the next version, it won't be there. A removal, we deprecated it in the past. Some of the stuff we deprecated in like 6.7, we kind of forgot or we've been working on getting rid of it, kind of forgot to actually get rid of it. Or it turns out there's dependencies in the product, more more realistically, there's dependencies that we've had to work through. So a lot of this stuff is just a natural evolution of the product stack. SIM and SLP, Service Location Protocol, you might remember some vulnerabilities in these things. Turns out those open source projects that we've been using are unmaintained. We had to get rid of them. And turns out not very many people are using them anyhow. Most everything uses native APIs, and that's good. There's been a ton of API work too, Open API 3.0. I'm actually not going to talk about APIs, but automating all of this stuff, API work is huge in 9. Update Manager baselines, we've been talking about this for a while. 9 only understands Update Manager baselines enough to get you over to the Lifecycle Manager images. Lifecycle Manager is so much better, and it's got complete feature parity. Actually, it's surpassed Update Manager. It's the way to go. It's flexible. I'm getting ahead of myself. I will talk about that. SSH configuration files, stop using SSH. The defaults are secure, one, according to CIS benchmarks and DISA STIGs and DISA SRGs and things. But 2, why are you SSHing in there anyhow? We really want to drive day-to-day admin through vCenter itself. You get role-based access control, all that stuff. But if you do need to change one of these defaults for some reason, 1, I have questions, and 2, I would say all these are changeable. They're just in the config store, the ESX config store now. And so they're parameters. You can look in the hardening guidance to see how to set and check them, that sort of thing. Smart card RSA secure ID support has been removed from ESX. Again, really trying to drive authentication. We don't want to be the authentication provider. We want to federate with your chosen identity provider. And because it does a better job of it, frankly. And it's got modern stuff, MFA, all of that stuff. There's still going to be break glass accounts, but you can do these things. You just have to federate now. And ADFS, I know everyone loves to hate ADFS, but ADFS continues to be a good choice in these regards. You can plug it all in. It's on premises, but there's also Semantic VIP that we work with, and there's lots of solutions there. Semantic VIP stuff is all local. It's clusterable. It's nice, actually. It's got all of this stuff, modern device health, all that stuff, and device hygiene, whatnot. IWA, Integrated Windows Authentication. This is one of those things that we deprecated a long time ago. It's still in ESX. We need it for ESX on certain levels. The Kerberos stuff for NFS, that sort of thing. But it's been removed from vCenter. We'd like you to use, at the very minimum, use 80 over LDAP-S. The better boundary there. Good fences make good neighbors. I truly believe that. And IWA blurred the lines of things. But again, ADFS, I know you don't like ADFS, or your identity people don't like ADFS. Yeah, there's stuff I don't like either. Or Federation. Federation, we've got good generic support now for federated identity providers. Getting ahead of myself. Trust Authority. Trust Authority was really cool, but it was complicated. And not very many people used it, and it got in the way of patching. It actually runs afoul of most VCF patching. We deprecated it. It's now removed. It will resurface in the future, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. We've got some good ideas there. NPIV is endport ID virtualization. If you've got a fiber channel SAN, this lets your VM pretend to be a full host on your fiber channel SAN. It's kind of like RDMs. Maybe don't use them. Not very many people were using it. And it blurs lines that shouldn't be blurred. It's gone. And last thing, storage IO control and SDRS for storage DRS for IO latency. The IO latency part. One, it's gone. It's really hard to do that, to make decisions about that, especially with modern disk arrays, modern all-flash disk arrays. Well, one, they're so fast, and 2, they've removed the need for it, and it was complicating things, so we threw it out. There's still SDRS for storage, just capacity, and there's still storage I/O control as far as there's network I/O control for storage throughput and things like that. So things to keep in mind. I mentioned versioning. Versioning has changed a little bit. We're not doing the 8 update 3P sort of crazy numbers like that anymore. Trying to have a more orderly approach to this. I really like the scheme. I'm happy about it. It's XYZA is it's actually represented in the release notes like this. X is a major version, so 9 is this release. Y is the update version. So remember, there's 3 updates. Basically, we always did a GA and then 3 updates, so 4 releases. Doing the European thing. So Y would be the version number. So if this were in the 8 series, we're 8.3, and then a patch that revs the VCF bundles of VCF bill of materials, that will get VCF 5.2.1, that sort of thing. And A will be a patch that doesn't rev the VCF bundle. So you'd go to the nearest bundle and then you'd patch up from that. So 5.2.1.1, or 9.0.0.0, which is 0.0.0.0, which is what was released. And then there, maybe be a 9.1 or 9.2 or 9.3, kind of like there was before. But we're not going to do the 8 update 3 Z whatever. What happens when we hit 26 releases? Do we do double letters? We've never gotten there before. So keep that in mind. Just a tidbit. And the other big change, the other big removal here is the I in ESXi. It's just ESX. Same great hypervisor, actually better hypervisor. 9 truly is the best version of vSphere, best version of the hypervisor. 25% more efficient name. And I joke around here. I joke around a lot, and I'm sorry about that if you don't like my joking around. But I do mention this because we did have an ESX in the past. ESX was more of a Linux-based thing, had more stuff around it, and then there was ESXi that was more like an appliance. Well, ESX now is more like an appliance too. And so you'll see us use this interchangeably. We'll try to have some rigor about it, but don't get too wound up about that. When you see ESX, just know that we're talking about the hypervisors. The old ESX is so long. That was ESX4. It's so long deprecated, so long out of support that we're not worried about it. Something I mentioned because it'll come up. Patching lifecycle. Vulnerabilities are a way that attackers get in, and we all know that. Vulnerabilities, identity management is the other way. And people break into the identity platform and then break into everything else because that's how that works. But getting rid of vulnerability is super important. The only way to get rid of a vulnerability is to patch. And you can work around it. You can do all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you don't patch it out of there, it's still there in some form. So how do we make this easier? And the product manager that works on this stuff, you guys gave him a ton of feedback, and he's great. He took all that feedback. Engineering built all this stuff. So pretty cool. Multi-vendor cluster images. This is all in Lifecycle Manager. Multi-vendor cluster images, really nice. It turns out the reality of the world is that we all don't just get a dump truck full of money to buy a new cluster every time we need one. And so our clusters will sometimes drift. They'll have different CPU generations in them. They'll have different hardware. Sometimes you're changing between vendors, all that stuff. And so having the ability to have different images on a per host basis or per cluster basis, it's very flexible now, and that's super cool. HA and NSX VIBs are now delivered as part of ESX. That means they're compatible with live patching, and I'll talk about live patching in just a second. It also means that our old guidance about patching, where you turn off HA because you get into election loops and things, that's not the case anymore. And so that's actually really cool. That's simplifying something. Improve vMotion for vGPUs. If you've got AI-enabled workloads or GPU-enabled workloads, we've got the ability to move those. The stun time is way less. It's seconds and not minutes, that sort of thing. And so that means that if you're patching your infrastructure, you may not have to talk to your workload admins there. You can just move them around, or they'll be less worried about it. It's good. So let's talk about live patching and custom EVC. These are really important things. So live patching, we introduced in 8 update 3, and we've actually never had a reason to use it yet. It's very limited use case in 8. And just the virtual machine monitor or the process. And we'll talk a lot more about virtual machine monitors in a few minutes here. But the process on ESX, if you log in by SSH, you can take PS and you'll see all these processes. And the process there, that's known as, that does the actual emulation of the VM hardware and whatnot, is called the virtual machine monitor. And in 8, the only thing that can be patched is the virtual machine monitor, live patch, that is. In 9, we're extending it to beyond the virtual machine monitor to NSX components, user space components, other VM kernel things. A lot more useful. And our goal is eventually to only, you'll still have to reboot once in a while. The major updates 9.0 to 9.1, that'll be a reboot. But then you just vMotion everything off, that sort of thing. But the host, in live patching, the host will enter partial maintenance mode. No VMs leave, no VMs come in, no configuration changes, so stable state. It'll do its thing. If it's got to change the virtual machine monitor, then it will do a fast suspend and resume. It's basically like an internal vMotion, and it's microseconds. It's very fast. One caveat, though, right now, TPM and DPU-enabled hosts can't use this. And TPM, we still recommend having TPMs in there. There's security things. We want to build it. It's on the roadmap, don't worry. But we want, how do you build something that changes the core operating system without letting attackers and your adversaries also have a capability that you don't want them to have? So that's what plays in our minds. That's important. The other big thing, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but EVC is one of those things that looks good on paper, but it's hard to turn on. And so a lot of folks don't and haven't. But EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility, it smooths out the differences between CPU generations so that you can vMotion a VM seamlessly back and forth, newer hardware to older hardware and that. And the proliferation of CPUs now, the different CPU families, plus the inability to turn it on in pretty much any time you wanted, kind of led to some improvements. We'll put it that way. And so we've got this custom EVC type now. Instead of choosing a CPU family, and you could just choose the baseline CPU features that are supported in your whole cluster and do that instead. And so that's pretty cool. You can turn it on with workloads running. It doesn't require specific CPUs. It will meet you where you're at. If your hosts are in link mode, I don't mention it on the slide here, but if you've got an environment that's got link mode, it'll actually allow you to see the whole thing and then choose the subset across all of your linked vCenters. That's cool. So, and and I mentioned microcode updates. CPU vulnerabilities are still a thing. There's on all platforms, frankly. There's nobody that escapes that. And as microcode gets updated, this EVC is an important tool for that as well. So let's go up a stack. We can kind of been working through the levels of things here. Let's talk about the core hypervisor itself. ESX, not ESXi, ESX. But some major improvements in ESX. And I should also mention that looking back, ESX 8 just passed its NIAP Common Criteria certification for the virtualization protection profile. That's really cool news. We'll see some announcements about that in the next week or two here when I write them. But that's important. That sort of testing verifies that what we claim for security inside the hypervisor really exists, that all that isolation is there, everything. So that's really cool. We've been talking about code signing. We'll talk a little bit about, why don't I just dive into this? I've got slides for all of this stuff. And so we've been talking about code signing for a while now. And that's because our whole ecosystem, and we've got a big ecosystem. Don't let Reddit tell you otherwise. And this big ecosystem's got inertia to it, and so getting people to enable fundamental, especially partners, to enable fundamental security things and stop telling folks like yourselves to disable security, it's been a process. So we started out in 7 with exec installed only. You could turn it on, but it wasn't on by default. 8, it was on by default, but you could turn it off. 9, it's on by default, and if you turn it off, you get an undismissible alarm that will say you've got a security problem, which is true, and so, you can imagine what the next step is. But there's use cases, again, keeping it flexible. There's pros and cons, and security is tough. Can't we all just get along? Secure boot. Secure boot is another thing that a lot of organizations don't use because they didn't turn it on and they don't want to turn it on. And what's the point? But it's a real important thing to prevent malware. And so in the past, in order to turn it on, you had to use a shell script on ESXi to, yeah, and I'm going to switch back and forth between ESXi and ESX. But you had to use a shell script to verify things. Now you should just be able to turn on secure boot, ESX will boot, and you can enforce it with configuration profiles and parameters in the system configuration itself. So that's really nice. Let's talk about the hypervisor itself. And so there's a ton of different layers inside the hypervisor. Well, one, especially for workloads. One, well, if we look at the guest operating system, unless you're using Windows 3.1, which still runs, by the way, or Novell NetWare, which probably still runs. The VMware Tools is really the only thing we deprecate, and you can usually still run all those old operating systems. But guest operating systems have internal process protections as well, and so applications have their own processes. There's role-based access control in Windows and Linux and all that stuff. Then outside of that, we've got the VM runtime. This is the virtual machine monitor I was talking about. And that's the processes you can see on ESX. In vSphere 7, we added a sandbox around that. So if the VM runtime tries to do something that the sandbox doesn't allow, it'll shut it all down, send alarms, that sort of thing. Important safety precautions there, because sometimes a VM runtime lets you do things that it shouldn't. It's software, it happens. And every VM has these protections. Then there's a security boundary with ESX itself, which we all know, and under that we've got CPU and memory protections, all the protections that they offer, or all the protections that they promise, but maybe don't actually offer correctly, and that's a whole thing. So, and so there are two main types of vulnerabilities at the level of hardware here. First, attacks that use the hardware vulnerabilities themselves, and so. Attackers can use those vulnerabilities to copy data from places that they shouldn't be able to access, memory vulnerabilities, that sort of thing. It's really important to keep your hardware firmware updated. And that's actually one of the nice things about Lifecycle Manager is it can work with a hardware manager to manage hardware firmware along with ESX versions. See, I'm doing it already. And ask me about VROPs, ARIA operations. The old guys. I wonder when it'll change. It's still VMworld. You should go to Explore, by the way. It's going to be awesome. Anyhow, second type of vulnerability here is what's known as a VM escape. And I know people say VM escapes, they can be scary. People get worried about them. And an attacker can escape the boundaries of the guest operating system and end up in the hypervisor somehow. That's not good. You don't want them there. So one of the big things that we've added to VCF 9 is an extension, more confidential computing capabilities, extension of what was there. We've supported Intel SGX and AMD's SEVES for quite a while now, since 7, I believe, and 7 Update 2, I think. And but now they've got AMD SEV SNP and Intel TDX, and we've got the initial support for that, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Confidential computing has been a big thing in public clouds because public clouds, it's hard to trust the infrastructure. You don't control the infrastructure. It's been different for VCF because you generally control the infrastructure. And actually VMware Cloud instances too, you control the whole hardware. You've got control of the whole hardware. You might not manage it directly, but you're the only tenants on it. Whereas like public cloud where you're not the only tenant there, you got to worry about a malicious neighbor. And so that's tricky. And you have to have a lot of blind trust in your providers. But confidential computing helps deal with that, helps prevent having to have that trust. Again, zero trust is less trust, not more trust, but not less complexity though. So trade-offs, always a trade-off. So AMD, SEV, SMP, Intel TDX, follow-ons to the first versions of these things. The first versions had some limitations. And these versions, which really curtailed operations, in a virtual environment, took vMotion away, things like that. And so, yeah, these are follow-ons to that, and will remove some of those limitations. AMD in particular has this thing called a secure processor. It's actually an ARM CPU embedded in their EPYC server CPUs, and which is kind of cool. And it just manages security. So if you've got a guest operating system that supports this stuff, and many of them do, it can request an encryption key from the security processor. And then if there is a breach of some sort, like maybe a VM, maybe there is a way to copy memory data out of memory from in an unauthorized way. All you get is a ciphertext. It's data in use encryption all the way to the CPU registers. That's wild. So, like I was saying, a lot of the stuff it's if you enable your hosts for it, it'll be a checkbox. In fact, mine says none here. I just got hosts. Thank you, AMD, for giving us some hosts to test the stuff out on, to try the stuff on. I need to take a new screenshot, but it's just a drop down, and it'll require hardware firmware support, so you have to turn it on in your BIOS and things. Right now, it's delivered by RPQ. So if you want to use this, contact your account team or your TAM, and they know how to get you the documentation for it and all of that stuff. The product managers want to talk to you about what you're doing with it because they want to understand the use case. It's actually, and that's good. You want to be able to give us feedback. We like feedback. We really do. So a lot more to come. This is the initial step here. So you'll lose some of the vMotions, you'll lose some of that stuff, but you can get going with it. And then future versions will have more improved things. The other big improvement here, and you'll see mention of it, it's not on by default, but it's starting to, well, I'll get to that. User level monitor. So CPUs have got different privilege levels, and there's basically it comes down to, it's usually represented as kernel space and user space. And kernel space is privileged. It basically is the run of the whole machine. It's even more privileged than root, and and that's trouble, because if you can get out in some of these vulnerabilities, if you can get out into the hypervisor, for performance reasons, we've always needed to run, well, and we're not unique in this, some of our competition as well needed to run the stuff as in kernel space, and need to run the virtual machine monitor in kernel space. And that's great. But again, if you've got a VM escape situation, you're privileged already. And can we do something more about that? Well, yeah, we can move that down to user space. And CPU manufacturers have added things to their hardware to help us do that in a really performant way. Not like it used to be. We used to have to emulate a lot of stuff. Now there's better support for that it can perform just as well. And so this is in 9. Like I said, it's not on by default unless you're using memory tiering or confidential computing. Or if you want to turn it on, you can turn it on. There's some advanced parameters. There's even an advanced parameter to randomize how many, you can run both types of virtual machine monitor simultaneously. If you want to test that, that's cool. And so lots of cool stuff there. And other thing, so we've got those sandboxes around the virtual machines themselves and the container runtimes as well. I should extend this not just to VMs, but container runtimes too. What if we did that for processes? What if we did that for scripts and all that stuff inside? And scripts are the interesting one. Inside ESX, to sandbox them as well. And so there's a lot of processes. I got tired of drawing little boxes on the screen. So NTP, VPXA, SSHD, these are my examples, but you get the point. They have sandboxes on them now too. We call that VMK access. That's the name for the sandbox and the permission model there. And part of our developer programs, part of our development kits allow you to create and sign sandboxes for scripts, Python scripts, and all that stuff. So partners can take advantage of this too and help everyone be secure. Let's talk about workloads. Workloads are really the point, right? I run infrastructure just to see the infrastructure, but you probably don't. You probably want to get something done, deliver a workload, deliver a service, that sort of thing. So that's important. And that's really the goal here. Few different things for workloads. Custom VM secure boot certificates. There's a number of organizations that want to build their own Linux kernels and sign them themselves. And we used to kind of have a weird backdoor for that, and sort of worked, was a little janky. Now it's first class citizen. There's a KB article on how to do it, advanced parameters to do it, documented. So there you go. Hardened virtual USB. We've seen some vulnerabilities there, and anytime we see a vulnerability or multiple vulnerabilities, we'll take a look at a subsystem. And so we went through our virtual USB, hardened it quite a bit, rewrote a bunch of things. So you'll get that as part of new virtual machine hardware. Updated UEFI revocation lists. Microsoft's Black Lotus vulnerability, where they lost control of their signing keys for secure boot. Over the last few years, they've been changing those out. And so we've updated our, so what they do is they revoke the old keys, the old certificates out of secure boot and put new ones in there. And so that's been a Windows update thing along the way. But yeah, we've fully converted now. So if you can't boot secure with secure boot, boot Windows media that you've got, go get the new Windows media. It's got new signing keys. Forensic snapshots. One of the interesting things about VMware is we always try to have hardware, the virtual hardware, be identical to physical hardware, but we also really try to snapshots, for example. Any snapshot we take needs to be runnable again, right? Well, not in the case of forensics. Digital forensics, those guys want to just load the snapshot into a tool and scan it. And so it doesn't have to be runnable, and that actually affords us some flexibility. There's a way to do this in 8. It's now, again, a first-class citizen. In 9, there's documentation on how to do it. And so that'll be cool for a lot of security forensics, incident response sorts of things. And then last, Virtual Hardware 22, which is the newest version in vSphere 9, VCF 9. We've revved the TPM spec for virtual TPMs to 1.59. There's some features that were added there, and this is a customer request. And thank you for giving us feedback on that. One other big thing that I want to mention, and we can get really in depth here, and I'm not going to. My coworkers, Dimitri, Francois, can talk about NSX, VPCs all day long. And whether you want that or not, I don't know whether you want me to talk about security all day long or not, same sort of thing. But VPCs, virtual private clouds, really trying to simplify the idea and merge the idea of network segments, NSX network segments across entire stacks, make networking flexible, make it secure so that there's just network segments however you want to do it. If you want to do it per workload or per team, whatever. But lots of cool stuff. And we're pushing this down into, like I said about NSX, where the VIBs are being delivered directly with ESX. There's all kinds of other stuff going on there too. You can use the ESX management interface as a tunnel endpoint, for example. Lots of goodness here. And so lots more to come, unifying all of this stuff. So it's one thing, but you'll see this in vCenter. You'll see the VPCs. You can configure them in VMware Cloud Foundation, the VCF operations, and all of those tools, and automation as well. Really important tool moving forward. Cryptography. We've got encryption, a lot of encryption still. Yeah. We're going to talk a lot about network encryption. We talked about data in use encryption with confidential computing, but really around TLS. And, I've got slides on all this stuff. Let's just get into it. So TLS 1.3 is the default on all ports. With 8 Update 3 and 8 Update 2, we'd enabled it as the default for internal cluster communications. But we've got all this, I mentioned inertia for ecosystems and environments, all this backwards compatibility to worry about. And so we hadn't enabled it for all of the client-facing stuff yet. And in 9, it's enabled by default for all the client-facing things as well. It'll fall back to TLS 1.2 by default, but you can limit the ciphers to the best algorithms. We feel strongly that all of them are secure, but compliance and scanning being what it is, and post-quantum cryptography, all that stuff plays in here. So you can pick very specific algorithms here. You can also limit it. So you see in the graphic here, NIST 2024, that was an 8. That will limit the it to the best algorithms, but there's a NIST 2024 TLS 1.3 only, TLS 13 in this case. We can't put a decimal point in there, but you get the picture. And so that's actually really cool, but it's on you to make sure that the rest of your environment can talk to vCenter at that point or whatever. All of the intercluster communications are good with it. We've tested it. It would just be, does your monitoring system understand TLS 1.3? It probably does, but yeah, everyone's different. So like I joke here, you'll have to find other things to talk about with GRC, sports, weather, the complex state of international compliance regulations, whatever you want to talk about. Speaking of compliance regulations, FIPS 140-2 and 140-3. We're moving to 140-3. That's an evaluation process. 140-2 still, it's in the sunset period or whatever, so still valid, but everything's getting recertified as 140-3. And so a lot of stuff is enabled by default, and that's really good. That's the direction we're going. Some things are enabled by default if it's on already and you do an upgrade. Or if it's not on already, you have to either turn it on, see the documentation. There's some caveats there. But there's also some other things that you have to turn it on manually. So VCF operations, you have to go in there and pick the enable setting for it. But not a huge deal, but something to keep in mind. Centralized certificate management. So the CA Browser Forum, they're the standards body for certificates. And they've decided, and this is going to be a nightmare, that certificate lifespans by the end of 2026 have to be 47 days. And I remember when it was 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, and things like that. And so that's going to necessitate automation, and we've got automation here. And VCF allows you to do some automation, do some reporting too. And then we've done a lot of work to be able to change the certificates in a non-disruptive way so that you don't have to schedule downtime, things like that. Key wrapping. So encryption uses a key provider. We've got native key provider fully inside of VCF and vSphere. There's also the standard key provider. Standard key provider connects out to an external key management system, or KMS. And so key wrapping is a new feature for standard key providers. One of the things that we were asked to do is be able to rotate what's stored in a key management system. And to do that, so traditionally we've had a data encryption key, a key encryption key that protects the data encryption key. And now we've got a third key, a wrapping key that protects the key encryption key as well. And it's only the wrapping key that's stored in the KMS if you want it. And it's rotated. You can see in the graphic here, you can set it up to automatically rotate. So you'll have one key out in a KMS. And then, if you set your rotation interval to 30 days or 90 days or whatever, after 90 days, there will be 2 keys, and then 3 keys, and then 4 keys. But it's not thousands of keys anymore, that sort of thing. And so you can specify a custom key ID so that your KMS folks can find the keys that belong to vSphere and VCF. But one of the caveats is you can't just turn this on. You can't just turn this on an existing key provider. You have to create a new key provider. But what you can do is you can do a shallow rekey into the new key provider, and you can do that while everything's online. And I've got sample code. We've got a GitHub repository for Q&A for all kinds of stuff. I'll talk about that at the end here. And there's sample code out there in features and capabilities, encryption, key providers, sample code. So you'll see it. Another thing I want to mention, and this is not new, but it's come up a couple of times, and I want to tell everybody about it. And that there's no latency limits on KMSs beyond the TCP connection times. And so what does that mean? That means that you can put your KMS pretty much anywhere in the world if you can reach it. And that from a geopolitical instability perspective for organizations, that might be kind of interesting. I know of at least 2 organizations that are doing this. They've placed their KMSs in a country where they know the laws and the privacy policy or privacy laws and all that stuff, and that they feel is stable. And then they've got clusters running all over the world whose encryption relies on the keys that are remote. And I know one of those is even using modern Starlink satellite connectivity to enable their clusters that are, in this case, floating around the Earth, which is wild. It's wild the times we live in. Just a thought, not saying it's right for you, but I put it out there as planting the seed. You can water it if you. Access control. Access control is super important for environments. It's one of the other main ways that attackers get in. They breach an identity provider, and then they can climb into whatever they want, and that's problematic. Helping with that. So vSphere 8 had an identity broker built into vCenter Server. And that identity broker was the evolution of what was the old VIDM appliances. The same team is working on them, the same product manager as well. And they're great. Another product manager that's taken a lot of feedback and really continued on the vision for this stuff. And it's a broker, so it's actually worth noting that unlike VIDM, it can't be its own authentication source, but it'll federate with other ones, semantic VIP, for example, on premises. But you can configure that in VCF. There's multiple deployment options. You can use the embedded one in vCenter Server if you want, or you can deploy it as its own appliance, the identity appliance. And that it can be one appliance. It can be up to 3 appliances, clustered for high availability, very flexible in that. And when you set that up, VCF will go through and configure all of the components to use it as well. And so that's nice too. And then last, very requested feature, we've always supported the Azure ADs, Entra IDs, Okta pings, ADFS, that sort of thing. But we've also got generic support now too. If you've got a SAML2 provider or SAML provider, OAuth2, OIDC, SCIM, all that stuff, we've got support for those protocols and those techniques that you can configure. And so third-party stuff, semantic VIP, for example, like I said, a lot of good options there, and adds to some flexibility. Storage security. There's a lot of stuff in vSAN. If you're vSAN curious or a vSAN user, you should go check out that. A lot of cool things with data replication and live recovery. Really cool stuff. But just from the stuff that I've picked out of the list, NFS, we've got the Kerberos integrity and encryption support now as mount options. We've also got, and to reiterate something from 8 too, you can control the NFS path, the storage traffic path, on a per mount basis now for hosts. You don't have to do weird routing table things. You can specify the VM kernel interface that should do the mounting. And that's nice. If you don't want to do encryption, or you want to turn on just the integrity checking, but not the full encryption. NVMe over Fabrics has authentication support. That's nice. Memory tiering. Memory tiering is probably my favorite thing that's been in 8, and now it's fully production in 9. It's got encryption capabilities. Remember that you can't sanitize an SSD and a flash device very well. Can't reliably sanitize them at all, frankly. And so anytime you write to them, you either have to use encryption or you have to destroy the device at the end of its life. And so memory tiering encryption, it does it in a performant way, and it's nice. So it's some advanced parameters. My coworker Dave Morera has got some nice information on turning this on and the performance and all that stuff. So, but memory tiering is really, really cool. Being able to take cold memory pages and get them out of memory, and really drive up the utilization of CPUs or fix the balance of memory. Virtualization environments have always sort of been memory constrained, at least in my experience. And so, yeah, really cool. vSAN traffic separation. You can now, just like NFS, I was talking about being able to separate traffic there. You can separate the client traffic from the backend traffic if you're using client. Yeah, a lot of architecture stuff, and a lot of helpful stuff there as far as flexible for performance and availability, traffic control, that sort of thing. Other notable stuff that I couldn't really wedge into one of these other categories. Notification of limits. When you start hitting vCenter connection limits, it'll start warning you with yellow and red alarms. Disconnected mode. So being able to, some improvements in being able to download and use things, update environments in air-gapped situations. Licensing is changing, the licensing process is changing with 9 as well. And I don't want to get into that. But there's a disconnected operation as well for licensing. There's still a reporting requirement. If you're interested in that, if you've got an air-gapped environment, you should reach out to your account team to tell them that you're interested in this. This is another situation where our product managers need to hear about your use case to make ssure that we've got it covered. That sort of thing. SHA-256 hashes. And so SHA-1, we've had SHA-1 hashes for a while, for a long time in the products. But SHA-1 hashes have a problem insofar as it's been demonstrated you could create 2 different files that end up having with different contents that have the same SHA-1 hash. And that's not good. That kind of invalidates it as a verification mechanism. So SHA-256, anytime you see SHA-1, you'll see SHA-256 hashes as well. There's a lot of compliance stuff that says, that asks in questionnaires. I get questionnaires on a weekly basis. Does your product have SHA-1 in it? Yes, it does, but we need it for backwards compatibility. But moving forward here, anytime I answer that, I'm going to say, yes, but anywhere you see SHA-1, you'll see a SHA-256 hash, which solves the problem. Last thing, the Manage Object Browser. It's been off in ESX for a long time. It's now off by default in vCenter. And we recommended people turn it off. Most people don't need it for anything. And it doesn't impact APIs or any of that stuff. And so you can still turn it back on if you need it, but it's off by default. Just another thing you don't have to worry about right out of the box, the proverbial box. Other stuff, VCF operations. I've mentioned that a few times. Security dashboard. Really trying to make a flexible security dashboard to alert you to things that have changed, things that might not be set the way we recommended. But again, my recommendations are not necessarily what you should be doing. So the ability to also customize that to one of my former coworkers a long time ago that did monitoring stuff, he always would say, get the red out, and like a Visine commercial. And you don't want all these alarms because people get alarm fatigue. Anytime there's persistent red stuff, it doesn't mean anything. When everything's red, nothing's red, and so being able to customize it and shut things off or customize it to the way you have it set, super important. And with that, I'm wrapping up here. As always, we've got a GitHub repository full of stuff. It's not completely updated for 9. In fact, that's a work in progress. And the little me working on it there. So if you see stuff and it's bothering you or you want to know, just reach out. And I update a lot of things on demand. So, but I'm moving through it. Our hardening guidance, by the time you watch this, our hardening guidance should be out there. The disastigs are already published, and we're customizing the baseline security hardening guidance to be more compliance friendly, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But to also be better about being a baseline for all of VCF, but all our customers as well. And so, yeah, work going on there. Like I said, disastigs are there. They have their own GitHub repository, and so you can find the stigs out there right now. I think we're updating the VMware.com stuff. Hopefully, by the time you see this, that'll be true. But if not, check back. But their GitHub repository's got everything you need. Another big thing that we're doing, and we're going to do more of with 9, is product applicability guides, explaining to your auditors what you've built and how it maps directly to the standards that they're evaluating you on. In fact, you're not one of if you're an auditor, you're my target audience, but IT practitioners are not really my target audience. It's your auditors. And so trying to help speed this up. We want to do a bunch of different things like this. We used to have these, and those kind of waned, and we'll get them back. But like I said, lots of stuff out in the GitHub repository, so go check it out. And if you do nothing else, please sign up for security alerts. If you haven't gotten a security alert, VMSA, VMware Security Advisory Alert via email in the last 60 days or so, you might want to go sign up again. Make sure that you can't use a free email account, Gmail, Outlook, Hotmail, stuff like that. But sign up with your business email or something that isn't those. And we try to be transparent about this stuff. It does us no good to keep these things a secret. You need to know it. Attackers may already know it. That's the peril there. And so letting you know that there's something to be looked at and letting you evaluate it is, we're going to continue that as best as we can. So at any rate, I really appreciate you. Thank you for being secure. Thank you for trying to be secure. Thank you for listening to me for the last 45 to 50 minutes here. And thanks for supporting VMUG and these events. I wish you well. Let me know how I can help you. Let your account team know how we can help you and what questions we can answer for you. Thank you very much and take care.